president of Sea Glass Theater Company, bringing you a very exciting spotlight program today that will introduce to you Jodi Goble, the composer of Wailing Women, which is a world premiere program that we're presenting in New Bedford on October 2nd. Please, first, let's meet our composer, Jodi Goble. I'd love to learn a little bit about you as a beginning artist. What inspired you to get into music and ultimately become a composer with music? I listened to your music this past week, and it's just extraordinary. So how did that all start when you were just a little person?
Well, first of all, what you need to know about any musician, especially one who starts when they're young, is that music shoves out every other childhood memory you could possibly have had. And I have no recollection of anything in my life before I was a musician. I think it just kind of takes over your brain. But the family story is that when I was 3, I started asking for piano lessons. I was obsessed with my aunt who played piano for church, and I really wanted to learn. And back then, and this was the late 70s, and the prevailing sort of pedagogical wisdom for piano lessons was that you started someone when they were 8. And I was very unhappy at the thought of having to wait until I was 8 to start piano. But my grandparents knew someone through the college they had attended who taught Suzuki violin lessons. So when just a couple of days after my 4th birthday, I started Suzuki Violin, which, if you know, is a method that's mostly you learn by ear at the very beginning, and it's absolutely tailored for very young children. I had a tiny little violin about that big, and I took violin for a year, and then there was a teacher in our hometown who opened up a new piano studio. And because I had taken violin lessons for a year, she agreed to take me on a trial basis. And I guess the rest is history.
I didn't realize the violin was tiny.
Yeah, it was what was it? They make them down to an 1/8 size violin, at which point they're barely playable because they're so small. But I had a 1/4. Yeah, I had a 1/4 size.
So when did you get the coaching? Not the coaching. When did you get the composing bug?
Well, okay. So being a kid musician, you assume from the outset that you can write music. And probably somewhere there's a stack of things that I wrote when I was really little, mostly for piano, because that was what I was playing and that's what I loved the most. The minute I started piano, violin took a backseat until I got to junior high and discovered orchestra, and that was fun. To play with a bunch of people and of like mind, and so violin had a renaissance for me around then. But it was always piano, and so when you're young, you just do it because you don't know you shouldn't. And I was lucky enough to have a piano teacher who encouraged me in that, and I was especially fortunate as an undergraduate to have the same professor who took me through the entire theory cohort. And he made all of us compose every time we were in class, especially the last semester of theory where we were studying 20th century composition techniques. He would explain the concept and then send us out to write a piece using that concept. It was amazing. And then I got to graduate school, and that's when the imposter syndrome set in. You're familiar with that term, right? I think that's everybody. It's not just music, but you assume that if you didn't go to school for it and you're not specifically training to do it, maybe you shouldn't do it. Maybe you should leave it to the professionals. And I kind of let it go, and I focused on making other people's music for a while. And then in my late 20s, I had a serious health scare. Just a little brush with it, and that kind of thing has a silver lining. It makes you reevaluate and reassess. And one of the things that came to the front of my mind at that point was, I really want to do this again. So I started writing.
And that fills your soul. I can tell when you talk about it, and, it just must fill you up.
Yeah, it really does. I didn't expect it to. I didn't expect it to ever occupy this much of my life. You had a question a little later on about, what's your side hustle? And and composing for me has been a side hustle for a while, but it's starting to ride in the front seat more often than not. So I guess I don't have one anymore. I just have hustle.
Spring winds bring the laughing butterfly flushes away. Rosy cheeks spring. Angel of a moment, the little shadow of my life. May it spring. Now fades the shadow, the golden shadow, with all the charm. Spring, roses within the bouquet, out to laugh but not to live. Spring, the love of spring. A beautiful runaway. Leaves me in tears, but my soul follows if till I catch her next march. Spring,
What took you to Iowa?
The job. I was in Boston. I had been in Boston for about 15 years after graduate school. I had a patchwork of part-time work. I was part-time faculty at Boston University, and I was part-time faculty at Walnut Hill, which is a magnet performing arts high school. And I worked as a very small cog in the Boston Symphony machine and played for chorus rehearsals. And Simon Estes at that point was an artist in residence. He was on faculty at BU, and I was playing for his role preparation class. And he knew that this job was coming open. He has strong ties to Iowa, and he recommended Iowa to me. And it's a full-time coaching position, which is a unicorn. So I jumped at it. I didn't find out until later that he was also recommending me to them. So he had his own reasons for wanting me here, I guess. But
Well,
yeah,
networks are important in every single
right.
fact of life.
I got here and immediately found out that he was planning a community concert series that was going to take him to every county in Iowa, and he wanted a collaborative pianist. I was like, oh, so you've been planning this.
I love it.
Yeah.
And the rest is history.
Yeah. The rest is history. Yeah, it's a really wonderful job. I really love my coworkers and my department and the students. It was a good move. I miss Boston sometimes, but it was a good move.
Well, we'll pull you back as often as we can.
I would love that.
How about that?
Sure. Yeah.
Now, you've traveled a lot in your career, I believe. Have you been around the world, or what are some of them? Tell me about some of them.
A great traveling companion, music. Well, when back speaking of the BSO and playing for the Tanglewood Festival Chorus, I was really happy. One of my first big musical tours was to go with that choir and that orchestra to Western Europe. So we started in Lucerne, Switzerland, and bussed and flew our way through Germany and France. We finally got to London for the last night of proms at Royal Albert Hall, which was this experience that I don't think I'll ever forget. It was so magical. And when you're a tiny part of an institution like that, you pick up so much musically because you're around musicians who are working at such a high level. So that occupies a really special place in my heart. And since then, I've done some summer music festivals in Italy and in Bulgaria. Varna, Bulgaria may be my new favorite city in the world. So beautiful. And right now we're planning a trip with the opera studio here at Iowa State and the orchestra to Vancouver. So yeah, if everything works out with COVID, like that'll be the next punch on my passport.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
I would live in your love as the sea grasses live in the sea. I would live in your love, by each rivers and places, drawn down by each wave that recedes. I would empty my soul of the dreams that have gathered in me. I would make with your heart as it beats. I would follow your soul as it leads.
Well, I think it's time to talk about Wailing Women a little bit.
Okay.
Tell me a little bit about the birth of Wailing Women. How did that come about, and what was the process like, and how are you feeling going into October?
Boy, those are big questions. Okay, so it started small. It started as Patrice asked if I would be willing to write. I think at that point it was a 15-minute closer to a mixed program about the role of women in the whaling industry. And it's like, okay, sure. And I started that. And then the next call was, could we expand the piece to half an hour and make it half of the program? Okay, we'll do that. And then that project got derailed because of the pandemic. And in the meantime, we always intended to go forward with it, but it just started growing until finally the final call was, let's just make this the entire program. Let's make it long enough that it can stand on its own. So from there was a lot of research. I think one of the really special things about this project is the text, which is nearly 100% sourced from primary sources written by women in the 1850s and 1860s. So to put it together, it's not so much that we wrote a libretto as that we compiled a libretto from our research. And that involved reading a lot of things that a lot of people had written and choosing who the characters were going to be and narrowing it down and deciding what made the cut and what didn't, and how to make a big narrative arc out of that. So it didn't feel like a song cycle, but it did feel like a work of theater. with that kind of theatrical narrative arc. So that took the most time to come up with the text. And then from there, once I had the text, I just started writing. And it's been a really great experience to live with these 6 people.
Do you have a favorite?
You can't.
I know that's like asking someone if they have a favorite child. I know.
Right. Well, I think, by the time we picked the 6, we could say they're all favorites just because they made the cut. I mean, for every woman who had an experience like this and wrote it down and was lucky enough to have her writings preserved so that we can read them today, there are 100 others who were doing equally amazing and interesting things who just didn't get immortalized in print. So that was a big consideration. Like, who is in this? It's the people who wrote it down that we know. We can hear them talk to us directly. Betsy Morey, who is we hear her in the opera. Her aria is her going down with her ship, or at least thinking she's about to go down with her ship. And something that she wrote that I thought was so charming and so interesting, and that I couldn't find a way to put in the opera, so I might as well talk about it now, is that she had a hard time dealing with the fact that she was on a ship that was killing whales. She had immense sympathy for the whales, and she thought they were beautiful, and she loved them, and she named every one that they caught, and wrote them poems as epitaphs and embroidered them.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And I thought that was great. It's just not very operatic, but it's this little moment that I connected with, because I think I would have a hard time with that too. So,
yes.
Yeah.
I mean, they're the most graceful creature in the ocean, as far as I'm concerned. It's amazing.
Yeah.
They're amazing.
They're really amazing. So, and when we talk about whaling, the whale is always a victim, right? And it was sort of refreshing to see that someone thought that too. It wasn't just about the oil and the lamps and the corsets.
Did they preserve any of her embroidery? Do you know? Or they?
Yeah, I've seen pictures of it.
Beautiful.
Yeah, little like cross-stitched whales and the little poem underneath it. Yeah,
beautiful.
Yeah.
What's the weirdest gig you've ever done?
I had to think about that one. I played a funeral in Boston way back in the day. And they called me the night before and they asked me if I knew the Chopin G minor ballade, which I did because I had put it on my senior recital in college. And apparently the deceased person had asked specifically for this piece, and they'd been calling pianists, just asking who had it. I was like, well, so I practiced feverishly for hours that night, trying to get it back in my fingers because it was very rusty. And I got there, and then it became very apparent the minute I started to play that nobody else cared anything about the G minor ballade, and they were just kind of waiting for me to be done. Like this was something that had been requested, but I can confess now, years later, that I cut out a big section of the middle and went straight to the coda after the first theme because it was just very apparent that they wanted to move on with their lives. So that was a weird gig.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah.
Made you want to stand up and say, hello, people.
Here I am.
Respect. Sing respect, right?
Right. Then there was a grand piano in that venue, but it sounded and looked as if it hadn't been played since 1972. So that may have had something to do with my decision as well. Like, do I really want to be here for another 12 minutes? I don't know.
What other kind of music do you listen to other than the type you compose? I mean, you're so eclectic. You must listen to a lot of different stuff.
I listen to a lot of different stuff. You know, I still have a lot of affection for violin and orchestral repertoire, and I listen to that sometimes, but really, I like singer-songwriters. I grew up as a kid being really obsessed with Paul Simon and Carole King. And oh man, who do I listen to now? Alicia Keys and India Arie, and I'm a huge Taylor Swift fan. I think every lyric she writes has something sort of clever and better than it had to be to make the song work. And I admire someone who can tell the whole world what she's thinking in every song and be completely unapologetic about it.
Love it.
So, but yeah, like, and then once I moved to Iowa, I got into country music a little bit, but not necessarily the country you'd hear on the radio. I tend to like female artists better than male artists in country, and I like people who write their own things. So Ashley Monroe and Casey Musgraves and Brandy Clark, people like that.
Fun.
Dolly, of course.
Of course. Oh my gosh. The queen.
Right.
The goddess, I guess.
Yeah.
those students every day, and people who mostly aspire to follow in your footsteps into a career of artistry and music and beauty, what types of inspirations do you bring to them for them to focus and succeed?
Well, I always start with the poem, the text. I think, every piece of vocal music, and this goes for the stuff I write as well as the stuff I coach every day, that repertoire that I love that other people wrote. It's all programmatic. There's no such thing as absolute music in the vocal world. We are always telling a story, and we're always linked to history and to humanity, like this common thread of humanity through the words that people wrote. And then there's something sort of magical about knowing that at least one other person in the world loved that poem, that text enough to set it to music. And then, what does the composer tell us about what the poet felt, and where do those two things intersect, or do they have the same idea about the poem? I don't know, I could talk about it forever. It's
wonderful.
I find it very inspiring, and I'm not sure my students always do, but they humor me. They go along for the ride.
Have you ever found a spark in your classroom, someone who you could point at and say, "Oh, that one's going somewhere"? I mean, is that an experience you have as a university teacher?
For sure. Every day, but then what I love even more is that you don't have any idea where these talented young people that you're teaching are going to end up. You don't know what's going to happen. And there are, even when they come into audition for us, there are markers that say, yes, we think this person has potential. We think that this could happen, but so much of it is up to them. And every singer, every young artist, every musician operates on their own developmental timeline, and they're going to do the wonderful things that they're going to do in their own time and in their own way. And I love not knowing the end of the story. And I love that my part in their life is not the end of their story.
I love talking to you.
Same.
It's just,
this is the best conversation. This is the best possible way I could have started my day.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, what else would you like to say about Wailing Women, or your career, or advice to whomever is going to be watching this? What are your words of wisdom for this morning?
Oh man, I don't know that I have any. I hope people come and see it. I think it's a story worth telling. And we're going to tell it as well as we possibly can.
I know it's going to be an asset for you and for Sea Glass that's going to just shine.
It's one of the most exciting projects I've worked on in several years. I'm very, very excited.
Wonderful.